Well, we've just heard the Anfield roar. Fernando Torres has just scored for the Reds. They're 1-0 up against Blackburn. It's a wonder goal, apparently. You can see it tonight on Match of the Day, of course. Well, Lord Treesman there, Mark, he talks about terracing not coming back, as far as he's concerned. But, so what needs to be done to bring passion back into the games that the crowds think are missing?
Well, I'm not sure which crowds do think that it's missing, because it's certainly not missing in the Premier League. I think if there's anything good to come out from Hillsborough, it was the Lord Taylor report. It was. I think Damien was saying 27 all-seater stadium now. That since that day, I think that's fantastic for the sport. Controlling security outside the game is much better. You'd actually let your children come to the games now. In those days, obviously you wouldn't do. So from that point of view, I think there's been a fantastic improvement.
Lord Treesman also wants to ensure the safety of fans outside the grounds, and those fears, I suppose, were highlighted after what happened in the Ivory Coast, 2 weeks ago, when 22 people died.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, the thing is, obviously, we've started inside the ground, which you must start, then you work out. But I think as well is there's now a case for all the big games, Manish, where there's actually probably an exclusion zone outside. You haven't got a ticket, you don't come anywhere near. Then obviously, you know, people can't rush at gates, they can't be crushed, etc., etc. So obviously, it's a very difficult thing what happened on that day. But generally in this country, I think we're ahead in that respect, certainly.
OK, well, let's return to Hillsborough then, where Sheffield Wednesday, managed by Brian Laws, are taking on Derby County, managed by Nigel Clough. Both those managers were in the Forest team on the day of the Hillsborough disaster 20 years ago. And the Wednesday manager is with Steve Wilson.
Thank you, Manish. I think in some ways the Nottingham Forest players and Nottingham Forest fans are one of the forgotten elements of the Hillsborough disaster. Brian, you were in the Forest team that day. How did it affect Nottingham Forest?
Well, quite clearly, the incident that happened, we were very much unaware of what was going on. We were still obviously playing the game. I can remember actually taking the throw-in, or about to take a throw-in, when a few fans ran onto the pitch, and still unknown, we thought it was a pitch invasion at first. And then really, until we actually got into that dressing room, that was the time when there was a few minutes which obviously escalated into people's deaths, and word got into the dressing room.
It was very difficult for me coming back here for the first time after the disaster. You're now the manager of Sheffield Wednesday. That must have been a very strange and possibly a difficult decision for you to come and have this as your place of work.
Well, one of the things that, with being part of that day, you'll never forget that day, never. And coming back to Hillsborough as manager, and particularly on the day that I signed, it didn't really kick in until I actually had a photo shoot, which was just over there, and I looked round, and that was the time when it really hit me hard. That actually, I still remember that day very, very clearly. So I get reminded every day about it, so I'll never forget it.
And it's changed actually very little in the 20 years, and the memories are very fresh too.
Yeah, there's very little that's changed other than the seating that you see before us. But other than that, yeah, it's always going to be very fresh. It's one of those occasions that it's so clear in your mind. 20 years have gone by, and it's still very, very fresh.
Thanks for your time, Brian. Back to you, Manish.
Sort of reminders everywhere.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Steve Wilson with Brian Laws. And Mark, you just get the impression, like 20 years ago when Liverpool won the Cup, is it their destiny to win the league this year?
Well, you would like to think so, certainly. I don't know whether you call it justice or whatever call it. Probably more on the lines of fate as much as anything, Manish. And I think from Liverpool's point of view, if they can win it, it would be fantastic for them and the supporters.
OK, Mark, thank you. Thank you to all our guests this afternoon on a very emotional day in and around Liverpool. We leave you with the late radio broadcaster Peter Jones and his final offering from Hillsborough on the 15th of April 20 years ago.
Well, I think the biggest irony is that the sun is shining now and Hillsborough's quiet, and over there to the left the green Yorkshire Hills, and who would have known that people would die here in the stadium this afternoon. I don't necessarily want to reflect on Heysel, but I was there that night broadcasting with Emlyn Hughes, and he was sitting behind me this afternoon. And after half an hour of watching stretchers going out and oxygen cylinders being brought in and ambulance sirens screaming, he touched me on the shoulder and he said, "I can't take any more," and Emlyn Hughes left. The gymnasium here at Hillsborough is being used as a mortuary for the dead. And at this moment, stewards have got little paper bags and they're gathering up the personal belongings of the spectators, and the red and white scarves of Liverpool, and red and white bobble hats of Liverpool, and red and white rosettes of Liverpool, and nothing else. And the sun shines now.